Treating your Tesla charger like a gas pump is a mistake that stays invisible for years until it's too late. While new owners plug into 100% and forget it, long-term owners know that these habitual patterns are silently degrading your battery health. Here is the charging behavior you need to understand immediately. The quiet difference between new owners and long-term owners. Long-term Tesla owners do not charge differently because they were more knowledgeable or cautious from the beginning. In most cases, their early habits mirror those of new owners. Charging was done for convenience, higher limits were selected, and the simplicity of the process reinforced those choices. During early ownership, that approach appears justified. Vehicle performance feels consistent, available range seems sufficient, and there is no immediate feedback indicating that a change is necessary. What evolves over time is not information but perspective. With years of ownership, patterns become easier to identify. Charging habits that once seemed neutral begin to align with subtle changes in behavior. Range may feel less predictable, or charging may slow under certain conditions. These changes rarely present as clear problems and are seldom tied to a single moment. Instead, they emerge as trends noticed gradually. That experience influences behavior. Charging shifts away from keeping the battery as full as possible and toward maintaining steady, balanced use. This adjustment is not driven by warnings or strict guidance, but by observing outcomes over long periods. While advice can inform decisions, sustained ownership is what reshapes habits. Over time, many owners adopt charging patterns that align with long-term battery aging rather than short-term convenience. Why charging is not just fueling a Tesla? Charging is often treated like fueling because that framework has guided driving behavior for decades. With gasoline vehicles, filling the tank provided flexibility, and a full tank was considered the safest option. A battery operates under different conditions. Energy in a Tesla is stored within a chemical system that responds to charging frequency, charge level, and duration. These processes do not produce immediate effects, which is why the distinction is easy to overlook. From the driver's perspective, the car behaves similarly regardless of whether charging is moderate or consistently pushed to higher levels. There are no alerts for gradual stress and no immediate loss of performance. Internally, however, charging behavior influences how much effort the battery expends to store and release energy, and that strain accumulates slowly. Because the effects are delayed, many owners assume their habits have little impact. Normal operation reinforces that assumption. Over long periods, however, accumulated stress can affect usable range, charging speed, and flexibility. These changes develop gradually rather than suddenly. Viewing charging as part of a long-term chemical process, rather than a simple refill, explains why habits matter, well before noticeable symptoms appear. The delay effect. Most drivers don't notice. Charging habits are often misunderstood because the vehicle continues to operate normally for an extended period, even when those habits are not ideal. For many owners, years pass without any clear indication that anything is changing. Range estimates remain familiar, charging behavior appears consistent, and daily driving feels no different than it did at the beginning of ownership. Battery wear does not present itself early or directly. It develops gradually and quietly, without alerts, warnings, or clear signals that would prompt immediate attention. Unlike mechanical problems, battery aging does not create a distinct failure point. There is no moment when the car suddenly becomes difficult to drive or unreliable. Instead, small changes accumulate over time. The battery slowly becomes less flexible in how it stores and delivers energy. Because these changes occur incrementally, they are difficult to perceive from one month to the next. Each drive feels largely the same as the last, which reinforces the assumption that nothing meaningful is happening beneath the surface. This delay is what leads many owners to underestimate the impact of early charging habits. When a noticeable reduction in usable range eventually appears, it can feel sudden and unexpected. From the driver's perspective, the car transitions from feeling normal to feeling different without a clear cause. In reality, that shift reflects a long process that began much earlier. Understanding this delay helps explain why charging decisions made during the earliest years of ownership can influence long-term outcomes, even when the vehicle provides no immediate reason to reassess those habits. If you find this helpful, feel free to subscribe for more Tesla insights like this. What this video is not about. This video is not focused on shortcuts, unconventional techniques, or rigid rules that complicate ownership. It does not promote extreme recommendations or practices that turn routine charging into a source of stress. There is no expectation to monitor every charging session closely or to manage exact percentages on each drive. It is also not about limiting how often or how far the car is driven, or about reshaping daily routines around the vehicle. The purpose here is clarity rather than pressure. Charging a Tesla is still meant to feel simple and manageable. The discussion does not center on perfection or constant optimization. Instead, it aims to explain what is happening within the battery over long periods so that everyday decisions feel grounded rather than uncertain. Small, steady adjustments made consistently over time tend to have a greater impact than strict rules applied inconsistently. This video is also not intended to create concern where none is warranted. Its goal is to replace confusion with context. By understanding how charging behavior affects battery aging over years rather than days, owners can make choices that feel practical and sustainable. The emphasis is on preserving long-term reliability and confidence without turning ownership into something that requires constant attention or ongoing calculation. What long-term owners quietly stop doing. Over time, many long-term owners adjust their behavior less by adding new rules and more by removing unnecessary ones. These changes are rarely deliberate at first. They are not the result of strict guidance or a conscious effort to be cautious. Instead, they develop naturally through lived experience. One of the earliest shifts is moving away from keeping the battery full simply because it can be. Early in ownership, a high charge level often feels reassuring. More available range feels synonymous with flexibility. With time, however, that instinct begins to ease. Owners come to recognize that carrying excess charge every day does not always align with how the vehicle is actually used. Another quiet change is avoiding extended periods at the extremes. Long-term owners tend to stop leaving the vehicle fully charged for days at a time when it is not necessary, and they also avoid letting it sit at very low levels without a reason. These adjustments are subtle and fit easily into normal routines. They do not require constant monitoring or careful tracking. Charging remains simple, but it becomes more intentional. What defines these changes is that they are not driven by discipline or restriction. Long-term owners are not adding complexity to their routines. In many cases, they are simplifying them. Charging shifts from a mindset of maximization to one of alignment with daily use. The focus moves from preparing for unlikely scenarios to meeting practical needs. Over long periods, these small, low-effort habits contribute to steadier battery behavior and a more consistent ownership experience. Why high charge levels are harder on batteries over time. Keeping a battery at a high charge level places additional internal stress on it, even though that stress is not visible in normal driving. At higher states of charge, the battery is holding energy under greater internal pressure. This does not create immediate performance issues, which is why the effect is easy to overlook. The vehicle continues to operate normally, and there are no alerts indicating that anything needs attention. For daily use, maintaining the highest possible charge is often unnecessary. When only part of the battery is used for routine driving, holding the remaining capacity at a high level provides limited benefit while requiring the battery to sustain that internal pressure continuously. Over long periods, that condition accelerates aging processes inside the battery. Even when everything appears fine from the outside, this is not speculative. Tesla's own documentation advises owners to avoid leaving the vehicle at very high or very low charge levels for extended periods, and to follow recommended daily charging practices rather than maximizing charge by default. Long-term owners often arrive at this conclusion through experience rather than instruction. High charge levels remain useful when needed, but over time they are treated as occasional tools rather than everyday defaults. That shift helps preserve consistency and long-term battery behavior without limiting normal use. The behavior change that happens naturally after years of ownership. After several years of ownership, many Tesla drivers find that their approach to charging changes gradually, often without a deliberate effort to adjust it. Early on, charging is closely tied to reassurance. Keeping the battery near full feels sensible when the vehicle is still unfamiliar and confidence is still forming. Maximizing range appears to reduce uncertainty, and the habit feels justified while experience is limited. As ownership continues, that initial caution begins to ease. Familiarity with daily driving patterns replaces the need to prepare for every possibility. Long-term owners start thinking in practical terms, charging with the next day in mind rather than aiming for the highest available percentage. Most days require only a portion of the battery, and charging naturally aligns with those realities. The process becomes more intentional, but also less rigid. Over time, consistency becomes more noticeable than convenience. Owners observe that the vehicle feels more predictable when charging follows a steady routine rather than frequent shifts between higher and lower levels. The battery behaves more consistently, and daily driving becomes less dependent on checking charge percentages. This does not eliminate flexibility, but it reduces the need for constant attention. This shift is not driven by strict rules or concern about making mistakes. It emerges from familiarity and trust built over years of use. Charging gradually stops feeling like a precaution and begins to resemble routine upkeep. The change is subtle, but it contributes to steadier long-term battery behavior and a more relaxed ownership experience. The role of time, not mileage. Mileage is often treated as the primary indicator of wear. But battery aging is influenced just as strongly by time. A vehicle driven infrequently can still experience noticeable battery aging, while another with higher mileage may remain more consistent. This difference can be confusing when distance driven is the only metric considered. A battery does not fully rest when the car is parked. It continues to store energy, regulate temperature, and maintain internal balance. Over months and years, those conditions matter. Charging behavior determines how much stress the battery experiences during that time, particularly when it spends long periods at higher charge levels. This relationship between time, storage conditions, and aging is well documented. Battery lifespan research consistently shows that degradation is affected not only by use, but by how long a battery remains under certain conditions. This explains why two vehicles with similar mileage can feel different in everyday use. One may retain flexibility and predictable range, while the other feels slightly constrained. These differences develop gradually and rarely point back to a single habit. They reflect years of repeated patterns interacting with time, not sudden changes or isolated decisions. How this impacts range, confidence, and resale, slowly. The effects of charging habits rarely appear as a sudden decline in range. They develop gradually and often go unnoticed in the early years of ownership. Daily driving continues to feel normal, and the displayed range generally remains within expected limits. Over time, however, subtle shifts can begin to appear. Drives that once required little thought may start to leave a narrower margin. Familiar routines may feel slightly less flexible than before. Each change is minor on its own, which is why they are easy to dismiss. What often becomes more important than the absolute range figure is confidence. Long-term owners tend to place greater value on consistency and predictability. A battery that behaves the same way day after day allows driving decisions to feel routine rather than calculated. When charging habits support that stability, the vehicle becomes easier to live with. Planning becomes simpler, and daily use feels more dependable. Resale is influenced in a similar, understated way. Buyers frequently respond less to a single specification and more to how the car performs in typical conditions. A vehicle that feels consistent and reliable often leaves a stronger impression than one that meets a range figure but feels constrained in practice. These differences do not emerge quickly. They take shape over time, shaped by everyday charging patterns that gradually influence reliability and long-term value. The safer daily charging window. Most owners learn eventually. With experience, many owners naturally settle into a daily charging range that feels balanced and practical. This process rarely involves strict guidelines or precise targets. Instead, it reflects an understanding of how the car is actually used. Daily charging begins to mirror real driving needs rather than aiming for maximum capacity. This approach remains flexible. Some days call for more range, while others require far less. Long-term owners become comfortable adjusting without feeling bound to a fixed number. Charging becomes a background routine rather than a task that demands frequent attention. The emphasis shifts toward avoiding extremes in most situations, while allowing normal variation when circumstances change. Over time, this balance simplifies ownership. Occasional higher charges for longer trips fit naturally into the routine without concern. On most days, charging supports everyday use quietly and reliably. This steady approach feels intuitive rather than deliberate. It preserves ease of ownership while gently supporting long-term battery behavior, allowing charging to remain simple rather than something that requires constant management. The bottom line: why this only makes sense in hindsight. Most insights from long-term ownership are not apparent early on. They develop gradually through everyday use, over years rather than months. With time, the focus shifts away from trying to manage every decision precisely. Owners begin to prioritize consistency and predictability over optimization. That steady experience is what ultimately builds confidence. Small habits matter because they require little attention. They operate quietly in the background, supporting reliability without changing how the vehicle fits into daily routines. Charging becomes less of an active concern and more of a routine that supports normal driving patterns. Over time, that ease adds up, shaping both performance expectations and peace of mind. In hindsight, many long-term owners recognize that no dramatic changes were needed. The adjustment came from a calmer approach informed by experience rather than strict rules. What feels obvious later is often unclear at the beginning. If this type of experience-based Tesla guidance is useful, you may consider subscribing for future updates.